Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Pittsburgh City Council's post agenda on the Mayor's Task Force on Community Police Reform. I am happy to be joined by Council Members Kraus and Wilson at this time. I know other council members will be coming in later on today. Obviously, this is a very important time in our city. We wanted the task force that just came out with a report maybe a couple weeks ago to get them in front of City Council as quick as we possibly could to understand a little bit of their recommendations. They all work very hard on this. I know there's a number of them on this call. We're going to pass it off to the task force members to give us an overview, and then others will add what their findings were, maybe some steps that we should take. I think it's interesting, you know, some of the steps that we are taking, other cities are taking the same thing. So I think we're all in this, you know, relatively large conversation around police reform as a whole. And I think that's a good thing to see so many different people on this call today. So I am going to pass it off to a good friend who's going to start it as one of the co-chairs of the task force. And then they're going to give us an overview. We're also now joined by Councilman Lavelle as well. So I want to thank my council colleagues. We're going to go through their report as quickly as we can so that council members have the ability to ask as many questions as we possibly can. So I'm going to pass it off to Valerie McDonald-Roberts, and she's going to take it from here. Take it away, Val. Thank you.
Thank you, council members. Thank you, Councilman O'Connor, for convening this group and wanting a more of an overview and as well as a deeper dive of the issues that we addressed as the task force that was convened by Mayor Peduto. I just do want to, first of all, acknowledge all of the task force members. I'm not sure if all are here, but I will say who all was part of the task force and the number of hours that were spent. And then I'll defer to Dr. Bullock to give an overview of our overall mission. And you had asked Councilman O'Connor about some organizational structures that were in place to help us get to this point. So again, it was Dr. Quentin Bullock, who is the president of Community College of Allegheny County. It was myself, and I'm a former Chief Urban Affairs Officer in the Mayor's office, as well as elected officials in the past. We also had Tony Beltran, who is President and CEO of Pittsburgh Mercy. Richard Garland, Assistant Professor, University of Pittsburgh School of Public Health. Dr. Bobby Watt Gear, President and CEO, United Way of Southwestern Pennsylvania. Sylvia Fields, Executive Director, Eden Hall Foundation. Professor David Harris, with the Sally Ann Seminsko Chair, University of Pittsburgh School of Law. Amanda Green Hawkins, Assistant General Counsel, United Steelworkers. Reverend Marie Kelly, Pastor and Representative of Western Pennsylvania Concerned Clergy. Patricia Lefwich, MS, Community Advocate and Biomedical Researcher. Dr. Angela Reynolds, CEO, YMCA Greater Pittsburgh. Tim Stevens, Chairman and CEO of the Black Political Empowerment Project. Rabbi Ron Simons, Director, Center for Loving Kindness Jewish Community Center of Greater Pittsburgh. Ms. Sharon Warner, Chief Operating Officer, Corporate Responsibility Group, PNC Bank. And Mr. Nathaniel Yap, Community Advocate. Those are the individuals that participated meeting for weekly for a while, but I'll defer to Dr. Quentin Bullock to go over how we met, the structures that we met within. Thank you. Dr. Bullock.
Thank you, Co-Chair McDonald-Roberts, and thank you, council members, for the opportunity to speak with you today. You know, first, I want to also just reiterate what a diverse and committed group of community leaders that came together in June to embrace the charge that was presented by Mayor Peduto. And just to restate that charge so that everyone is on the same page as we continue to review the discussion. Mayor Peduto presented the charge to the committee to lay out a blueprint for real and sustained change and reform for the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police, generating a blueprint for real and sustained change and reform for the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police, generating recommendations for concrete suggestions and people-oriented solutions that will make Pittsburgh a safe and healthy place for all of our citizens, especially for members of our Black community. As we all know, this is a big and challenging task, and the members of the task force recognized that this was not going to be easy. The conversation began by first setting some ground rules as to how we would operate as a team, and making it very clear that we valued everyone's contribution and comments, and that we wanted to respect the views and thoughts of all and be open in our communications as we begin to discuss this topic. We then began to look at what are some of the common themes that we could work towards, and the list was quite extensive. And over time and several discussions, the task force agreed on the 8 areas of focus, and I will indicate what those areas are. The first is eliminating racial disparities. The second is officer wellness. The third is reimagining policing. The fourth is recruiting, training, education, and hiring. The fifth is relations with Pittsburgh's Fraternal Order of Police. The sixth is transparency and accountability. 7 is use of force, changes needed for Pittsburgh Bureau of Police policy. And the last is use of tear gas, rubber bullets, flashbang devices, and other less lethal methods of crowd control. After a lengthy debate and discussion and getting down to those areas, we then divided our task force into subgroups that were led by various members of the task force. This allowed members to do a deeper dive into the areas identified and invite in speakers, review literature, look for best practices, and then bring in groups to the entire task force to make specific presentations until we got adequate information to help us zone in on the responses. I can say there were many tense moments, many moments of anxiety, but in the end, we all came together to agree upon the final product that you received earlier in October that really documented a commitment of a task force that brought forth an authentic, thoughtful, and innovative report that was comprehensive and what we feel are fair, achievable goals that will provide a solid foundation that will support Pittsburgh Bureau of Police and the city of Pittsburgh to really begin to move our city and region as a whole to be a safe and welcoming environment for all. So that's a quick summary of each of the areas that we focused on and the general processes that were followed to help bring forth the report that was presented to Mayor Peduto.
Thank you, Dr. Val, you're on mute again, sorry.
I do that because I have a cough.
There you go.
Yeah. Do you, how would you like us to proceed? Would you, do you want to start with the questioning? And Dr. Bullock and I can, preferably bring a subcommittee chair or someone who was very instrumental in delving into the subject area that you're questioning about, as well as other council members.
Yeah, we can do that. I know we are joined by Councilwoman Gross as well. I wasn't sure. There was a letter Tim Stevens is on. I don't know if Tim wanted to read the letter and then we could get to the council questions.
I have no problem with that.
Tim, you're muted as well, Tim.
There may be other members who are here who would like to make a short statement. I know I'd like to do that as well. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. I'll start with Tim, and then if David, you want to jump in after that, we'll just go. Just please raise your hand, and we'll do a quick loop around the task force members, and then we'll get straight to council questions. Tim,
All
go
right,
ahead.
if the staff will share the screen with the letter, because I wanted to read it into the record.
Tim, it will be sent to members. I think with all these members on here, I think there's a technical issue that we have on Zoom that cannot be shared, but it is going to be submitted to the record.
Okay, well, in that case, I'm going to let my friend David go because I'm going to have to print it out because I was under the impression it would be on the screen.
Yeah, sorry, there was a technical issue with our Zoom
problem.
this morning.
We'll deal with it. Thank you.
Okay, all right, thank you. David, please go ahead.
Well, I want to thank the members of council, especially Councilman O'Connor, for organizing this meeting this morning and allowing us to come and speak to you. It's been 3 weeks since the release of our task force report, and it's no small thing. It was a lot of work, as you've been told. I would like to thank our co-chairs, Ms. McDonald-Roberts and Dr. Bullock, for leading us through it. At this point, I'm speaking only for myself, of course, but I think there are 3 important things that we have to think about now. They are implementation, implementation, and implementation. We agreed on one thing above all else. Dr. Bullock was quite right when he said there were contentious moments and disagreements. We were not all of one mind, but we agreed on one central thing. Nobody on the task force had any interest in producing something, a report that would sit on a shelf and gather dust. We want to see these recommendations implemented. And we have come up with over 100, if I counted right, concrete suggestions and recommendations for the city. Many of them are actionable right now, and we want to see those things implemented. I think that's what we were for. I know that the mayor and the council have actually already kind of crossed paths with us in the sense that they have enacted legislation and issued orders that parallel many of the things that we recommended. So those things are out there to be put on the checked off list right now. But if we're talking about implementation, we have to know who's in charge of implementing it, what person or persons, what agency, where's the list for the public that shows which of these things have been done and that tracks what is going to be done. There are many things that can be done right away in the medium term, in the short term. I'll give one example. You know that the first area of interest that we focused on was, as Dr. Bullock said, eliminating racial disparities. We focused on that because it is number one, very important to the people of our city, particularly people in the Black community, that problem be addressed and addressed directly. But also because there was data out there, not enough data in our opinion, but plenty of data indicating that racial disparities existed already. It was in the police department data for all to see. Therefore, implementation should have started the day after our report came out. What could we do? What we would expect is what we asked for. We wanted the city and the police department to tell us, is there any way in which this data can be explained on a non-racial basis? If not, that means this problem must be solved. That means this has to stop. And we haven't heard anything from anybody yet explaining on a non-racial basis why there are these racial disparities. That's one that could be acted upon right now. So in a word, it's all implementation. We want to know who's in charge, how it's going to happen, the timeline. We want to see these things put into action. We have done the work. We believe we presented a plan that is both far-reaching, deep, and reasonable. And we'd like to see action. And I applaud the city council for sitting down today, giving us a chance to talk about where things should go. And I thank you for the opportunity to talk to you. I appreciate it, and I appreciate my task force members and leadership so very much. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I see Rabbi's hand is up, and then I'll go with Bobby after that. Yes, thank you.
Councilman, I can't seem to find a way to raise my hand for whatever reason, but can you put me on the list too, please? Thanks so
Yes,
much.
I will. Well, when we get to council members, you were first, then Councilman Wilson. I don't know if Councilman Lavelle has any questions, and then Councilwoman Gross. I'm just going to go as we usually do of order of when you signed in.
Thank you.
All right, Rabbi, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. And just to continue with Dr. Harris's assessment of implementation, just on the good news front regarding officer wellness. So it was the day after the report was released that Reverend Liddy Barlow of Christian Associates of Southwest Pennsylvania and Reverend Darnell Drury of the Center for Victims and I met with the chief of police and his command staff to talk about forming clergy community police councils in every zone and throughout all 90 neighborhoods. So there, for the low-hanging fruit and for the things that we know are about community policing, that are about officer wellness, that are about making a shared sense of humanity between police and community. Some actions is happening, and in fact, next week we're meeting with the community relations officers and the neighborhood relations officers to spell out the plan so that we can begin to implement.
Oh, thank you, Rabbi. Ms. Guerrero.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for this opportunity to connect with City Council and share a bit about the work of the task force. It's a fool's errand to follow David Harris and Rabbi Simons in terms of articulating the work of this task force, but I do feel compelled to share a couple of things. First of all, I came at this work really without much experience in policing or police reform, and we spent over 4 months hours and hours and hours each week meeting with experts in the community and meeting with community members. And I want to make sure that I highlight a couple of groups with whom we met. We met with individuals in the community who work with school children, particularly African-American school children, and how they are referred to police 95% more in the city of Pittsburgh than any other city across our country. Deeply, deeply concerning. We met with members of the LGBTQIA community and talked with them about how their experience interacting with police has been. We talked with representatives from people who work with those with disabilities and how they interact in the community. And of course, those who work in the African-American communities. These folks came to us with their concerns, their recommendations, which were all thoughtfully discussed, and many of them are included in this report. And I want to make sure that I emphasize that and emphasize that cross-cutting all of these recommendations was the fact that we simply don't have enough data, enough disaggregated data, enough publicly available data on interactions with police. And we would really like to see that recommendation in particular be adopted so that we could make better decisions and better reforms based on what we're seeing in the community. So I simply want to thank my fellow task force members and also thank all of those individuals in the community who frankly are frustrated and really wanting to see reform. And they took the time to meet with us and to share their concerns and their experience. And we really want to see some implementation because we made commitments to listen and put those ideas forward. And so I just want to echo David's exhortation that there be some implementation of these recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. We will go to, I believe, Tim, is your letter ready to be read? It is, just so you know, you're on mute again.
I'm going to see if I can share on the screen. I had a difficulty with the printer, so.
So just so you know, there's some technical issue that we're getting from our department that says sharing the screen is not working. But every member of council does have the letter and it's submitted to the record. So we all did receive the letter. I don't know if you just want to do an overview of the letter.
Okay. If I can,
You can try. There seemed to be a glitch in our system this morning when we tried to share some things.
well, that threw me off. I have to admit, I wanted to get that in the record as it
There,
was.
it's popping up now. I don't.
Yeah.
Maybe they're on. I don't know if our
What's
team.
popping up? What's popping up?
There's some things popping up on my screen right now, but it's not the letter.
No, it's not the letter. It's just the launch for the meeting. So
Yeah, I don't know. Madam Clerk, we're having an issue with this. I know David had mentioned something like that earlier.
yeah, we need you to stop sharing your screen.
Wow. I'm very disappointed because I did not print the letter out and I had a problem with my printer just now. So we're not doing well. I wanted
Well,
to get,
we have the letter if you want me to look it up and try to read it later on, if that would work.
you can do that and then I can comment on it. if I
Okay,
can.
all right. I will pass it off to Councilman Kraus now, and then we will come back. I know we are
Yeah.
also, oh, sorry, I didn't see. Sharon wanted to add something as a task force. Sorry, Sharon. Then I'll go to Councilman Kraus. We are joined by Councilwoman Strasburger as well.
Good.
No problem. So thanks so much. I want to thank all of you for convening this meeting today. And particularly, I want to extend my thanks to Valerie and Quentin for being such great co-chairs of this task force and herding a very opinionated group of cats, but they did it. We made it. But I wanted to, I don't want to just reiterate everything that folks have said about implementation, but I do really want to highlight what David said about the implementation piece, which is, when we started this task force, one of our first meetings was looking at a history. We had someone come talk to us about the history of police reform in this country. We looked at many, many other cities who have been through this recently, things that they have put into place. And we really took to heart some things that sounded amazing and worked very well in other cities that we realized won't work so well here in Pittsburgh for a variety of reasons. And the things we included in our report are things that we feel strongly can be implemented here and will help. Some of them are more long-term, some are short-term that we can implement pretty quickly. Some are longer-term projects, and we recognize that it's not going to happen tomorrow. But everything we included, we think needs specific attention. So I just would hope that City Council really looks at each and every recommendation, doesn't try and just prioritize, okay, let's take the top 10 that we think look good. Every single one of them we think deserves time and attention and implementation.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Tim, I'm looking up your letter now. I'm going to go to Councilmember Kraus and then come back to that. Is there anybody else from the task force?
I have my
Valerie, sorry.
I don't know if the hand raise is working, but it's another housekeeping item as well, because I'd rather the task force members have an opportunity at this time to comment more than me as a co-chair. When we talk about, it was very broad, as everyone has said. I just want to acknowledge, because a lot of people have looked at the beginning and not the end of the report. And the end of the report acknowledges to all council members the hours that other people spent, external people spent in helping us draft this report and bring things together. So I just want to give some acknowledgement to the people-oriented part of the report. And again, we have people that are within the city, like CPRB, the Gender Equity Commission. We've had police officers, etc. But for external partners, we have Ciora Thomas, president and founder of Sisters Pittsburgh for the LGBTQIA component. Daryl Holtz, an advocate for disability rights. Minister Darnell Drury, as Ron had talked about. Dr. Emma Lucas Darby, who, well, she's the chair of the CPRB. Aaron Dalton was with Allegheny County Department of Human Services. Ernest Winthrop, we had Noble. Let's just say we had members of Noble, the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Officers. We had ACLU representation by Gada Makashi. And if I tear up the name up, somebody, would you please correct it? Let's see. Jessica Benham, who's Director of Development of Pittsburgh Center for Autistic Advocacy. We talked about the inordinate police involvement with our youth in schools for negative stuff. We had Jose Diaz, Senior Director of the YMCA of Greater Pittsburgh. Dr. Kathy Elliott, CEO of Wynn's Girls. Kier Magwa Nazia. I tore it up. Senior Project Manager of Allegheny County Health Work. Let's see. Lavani Lindsay. Hold on. Bear with me. Michael Gay. A lot of people within the city. Monica Ruiz, who is the Executive Director of Casa San Jose. I want to give her big acknowledgement. She was quite a voice for the task force in making sure that we always kept in mind the immigrant and new American populations in our deliberations. I'm almost done. Sarah Goodkind, Assistant Professor of Social Work, University of Pittsburgh. Theodore Johnson, Chairman of Pennsylvania Board of Probation and Parole. Tiffany Wendell, and Dr. Yinka Aganga Williams, Executive Director of Acculturation for Justice, Access, Peace, and Outreach. And we have Councilman Kraus, the Hilltop Community Advisory Working Group. He led that discussion. So I just want to give props to others as far as how broad our discussions were. Thank you. And I don't know if you want to say anything, Dr. Bullock.
You did a great job covering those external partners who joined in with us, so thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for the rundown there. I will pass it off to Councilmember Kraus right now, and then we will go to, I have Councilman Wilson, Lavelle, Gross, and Strasburger on the list of when they signed in. So Councilman?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everyone. Allow me to start by saying how much we appreciate your dedication, the time, the effort, the energy that you put into not just crafting this report, but to understand on a much more holistic vein the importance of police-community relationships in the ability for us to be truly America's most livable city. So Dr. Harris hit exactly the chord that I wanted to hit, and I wanted to talk a little bit about implementation of the recommendations. I am a big believer in eating the elephant one bite at a time, and I know this is just a massive undertaking, and I worry that we may become overwhelmed by the enormity of the task in front of us. And so to boil it down into one question, I was wondering if anyone could offer up what would be the next right thing to do. Are we able to narrow it down so that we're not bogged down in being overwhelmed, that we can take that first step towards implementing the plan so as to be able to empower us to take the second step? Am I asking too much of the task force at this time? Because I know how much time you've put into it already. Am I asking too much to ask you for recommendations on implementation of your report so that we can all be on the same page and speak with one voice moving this ahead? That's my question.
May I try?
Please. Thanks, David.
I would recommend in each of the core areas, identifying that first step. So in other words, not putting any one of these core areas above any other. For instance, in the eliminating racial disparities core area, I would say the first step is obviously to call upon the city and the police department to give a non-racial explanation for the disparities we already see, if there is one, and if not, to move forward into identifying where those are happening and eliminating them. That is a step that is ripe for us. If you go to the section on the use of tear gas and rubber bullets and so forth, we recommended identifying an outside agency to examine policy and practice, not to go over the incident in East Liberty or any other place, but as a general matter. You will find a first step in each of those 8 areas that, if not low-hanging fruit and not easy, at least is a first step. But I would simply go through each of them and pick out one thing. We can do more than one thing at a time, I think, and the urgency is such that I think identifying any one piece of it, just one in the 100+ recommendations we have, is probably to diminish the others.
Yeah, Bobby, thank you.
The only thing that I would add to that is it seems that who has the accountability to drive the recommendations in each of these sections. I don't know that it's one department or one individual, but having some clarity about who owns the sections, who owns the recommendations within those sections. And that's something that we left this process with a lack of clarity. So who owns it now?
That's such a good point. Chair Roberts?
Yes.
Can I ask you, hi, good morning, how are you?
Morning, Bruce.
Can I ask you a question then, please? And I certainly don't mean to put anyone on the spot, but philosophically speaking, has the task force accomplished what it set out to do and will now disband, or does the task force remain connected as a touchstone, if you will, to assist with the implementation of the report?
My understanding, and Allah is on the phone from the mayor's office, and please correct me if there is on that side of the 5th floor a different bent here. But my understanding is that task force, by definition, are to complete a task, and our task has been completed in devising a report. The mayor is the executive director of the city of Pittsburgh. We are not executive directors, nor are we administrators. We are lay people that he capitalized on in getting the people-oriented solutions or recommendations. My understanding is that the mayor's office is going to take it from here. They will work with city council members as they do on any initiative. I mean, there's nothing different going on here, Councilman Kraus. So they will get it together. One thing that they do have in place is the Office of Health and Safety. They'll probably work with this new office that they're devising in many of the areas that Bobby and Angela, as far as the human services element, to make sure that that is actually implemented, that we do use more effectively outside sources. So I would venture to say the mayor's office is going to take the lead from here. We have delivered the report. The one thing that is not necessarily a specific part of the report is making a recommendation for some structure for ongoing community involvement, ongoing people, whether they're task force members. There's many people that were not task force members that need to have input on an ongoing basis with the city in terms of following up on implementation. How that happens, it's up to the mayor's office to figure that out.
So Chair Roberts, I asked the question on purpose because I wanted it to be a part of the public record that the task force has completed its duties and has handed it off to the administration and council for our role in terms of implementing the recommendations made by the task force. So I would love to hear a little bit from Ala, if you would not mind enlightening us a little bit here. And then I would go back to our chair today, Councilman O'Connor, and perhaps suggest that as a complement to this post agenda, we would host a post agenda of administration officials that will be charged with the responsibility of making certain that the recommendations of the task force are truly implemented, and how we as members of council can be co-partners in that process. Hi, Alan. Good morning.
Also, Councilman Kraus, after Allah speaks, I do have my letter now that I do want to read because it does respond to your question, actually, when we're ready. Thank you.
Yes, Tim,
Thanks, and I'll
actually,
leave it up. I'll leave that up to our chair. Tim,
Okay.
but thank you so much. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are, if you would, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Councilman Kraus. And I also want to acknowledge my colleague Hirsch, who's also on this call, both of us worked and helped staff this task force, and both of us represent the mayor's office. So as many of the council people here know, a few weeks ago, we announced the Violence Prevention Initiative. And I want to kind of break that down for everyone on this call and for public record as well. The Violence Prevention Initiative includes 2 offices. So as Valerie mentioned, there is the Office of Community Health and Safety, which is going to coordinate police action with social service workers. That's their specific task. But the second office is the Office of Community Services and Violence Prevention. And that office is going to work with neighborhoods on issues such as homelessness, addiction, mental illness, whatever else can possibly lead to police action. It's kind of a prevention point. And so both of these offices are tasked, are under the Violence Prevention Initiative, but more importantly, Shatara Murphy is going to be leading the work within the Office of Community Health and Safety, and the recommendations that were served up by this task force are part of the roadmap of the work that she is going to be delivering. And so in response to your proposal, Councilman Kraus, I think Shatara is a very important person and voice to have in those future conversations as well. Hirsch, I don't know if you want to, I apologize. Hirsch, do you have anything that you would like to add?
Yeah, please.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alon. I want to thank, of course, the task force for their work over the last several months. I'll just add, in terms of public involvement, the task force is up on the mayor's office page, and it's available translated in the top 6 spoken languages in Pittsburgh. And there's also a feedback area where the public can come and share any thoughts they have based on the report on implementation or other ideas for police reform, that will be sent to the mayor's office and the administration. So I just want to point that out, as co-chair McDonald Roberts mentioned, public involvement there. But Allah hit the nail on the head with the mention of the Health and Safety Initiative, which was directly informed by task force recommendations.
Chair Roberts?
And Councilman Kraus, as well as Chair O'Connor. In addition to what they said, I just wanted to make sure, in lieu of what Dr. Harris is pushing for, is the transparency component, is that there be a very deliberative effort to make sure that people know when these discussions are taking place, so that they can tune in, get involved, listen in, provide input. The one thing that we found, and Dr. Bullock can acknowledge it as well, is that we had many people, just general public members. They weren't part of necessarily an organization. They just wanted to provide input on what they thought, like Errol Miller. So we want to make sure that people have an opportunity to listen in and to provide input as things move forward, as far as the implementation, which Dr. Harris has said is so vitally important. Everyone is looking and everyone wants to see more than anything else. So I'm glad that you made the recommendation to have a post agenda with the administration, so we can see how the total government package is going to proceed. The one thing I do want to say is that, as we talked about health and safety and wellness and homeless and everything, we really do have to talk about training. I'm sorry, I'm personally harping on that. as we talk about racial bias and discrimination and all these things, it starts at the beginning. I always try to start at the head, and training is so vitally important as we're taking a pause for the cause because of this pandemic, because of refunding out, the quote unquote, the defunding part that people talked about is a reallocation of resources to address a lot of the recommendations. Please, council, we really do need external input on the training. The training modules need to be reviewed by outside sources, by people like whether it's academia, whether it's outside organizations, to make sure that we are indeed equipping our cadets and our officers with the right mindset and with the right tones as they move forward. So I would ask you to please don't forget training.
I don't want to dominate the conversation. I need to sign off. There are other members that really want to engage. I would like to leave with just two things in reference to what Chair Roberts just offered up. We had very active and engaged constituency throughout the Hilltop in crafting, in being our part of crafting this report to the administration and to City Council. And I want to honor them by continuing to be as open, transparent, and honest as we can be, to keep them engaged throughout the process, because I promised them that they would be. If there was anything I took away from the engagement that we had with the community throughout this process, it was to hopefully have our administration, our council, and our Public Safety Bureau understand the difference between protecting and serving and policing a neighborhood. And policing is not what we're looking to do. We are looking to protect and serve. And I felt it was very important to make sure that that went out there. And I would ask Alla and Hirsch both if we could work collectively with you and our Public Safety Chair, Councilman O'Connor, in crafting whatever public post agenda, whatever the case may be, that we can, now that the task force has handed it off to us, we are the electeds. We bear the responsibility now to make certain that these recommendations see the light of day and are implemented. And I want to be contributing and helpful in that process. So I'll sign off for now, but please, maybe later in the day, we can touch base and set up what we need to do to make that transfer, if you will. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Council.
Thank you.
And we can call for that next week.
Thank you.
Tim Stevens does have a letter. We did figure out, Tim, how to post it on the screen. So Louise, if I believe you're listening, do you mind posting the letter? Tim can then read it. All council members have it. And then I'm going to go to Councilman Wilson afterwards. So Tim, we're just going to scroll through as you read the letter. Does that work?
Sure. Thank you.
Okay.
So first of all, thank you all for your interest in Mr. O'Connor for taking the lead on this. I personally appreciate it. I'm sure the city does as well. So thank you for your interest in playing an active role in reviewing and hopefully assisting in the adoption and implementation of many of the police reform recommendations proposed by the Pittsburgh Task Force for Police Reform. And let me stop and say that I absolutely echo the words of David Harris, who I've worked with for years on police issues. Implementation is so important. Our task force was indeed comprised of a team of very dedicated individuals committed to provide the city of Pittsburgh with a well-rounded and comprehensive document. And with the continued presence of restlessness and upsets around the issues of policing in Pittsburgh, on November 2nd, 2020, I urged Mayor Bill Peduto to personally review and have his staff members and leadership of the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police to thoroughly review and in an in-depth fashion, the recommendations of the Pittsburgh Community Task Force for Police Reform for purposes of identifying what can be implemented immediately or within months, or even maybe within weeks, and what steps must be taken to expedite other key recommendations. I also stated in that letter that one area which could decrease frustration on the part of some Pittsburgh citizens with regard to the task force report might be a statement from the Peduto administration that the administration immediately prioritized certain recommendations. I take this opportunity to ask Pittsburgh City Council, as the legislative body for the city of Pittsburgh, to do what it can to actively forward that same agenda. Such recommendations include identifying any reimagining of the use of funds currently or recently designated for policing in Pittsburgh, which can be implemented now or in the very near future, pages 17 to 20. 2, implementing an office/director of data analytics and policy, or accomplish through a contractual arrangement to collect, evaluate, and use data. And that goes back to Bobby Watt Greer mentioning earlier, to use data to drive policy and practice to people with disabilities, members of the LGBTQII community plus, and youth, page 30. Number 2, expand, revitalize, and fully implement use of the personnel assessment and review system, PARS, to assist police at identifying potentially problematic police officers. This is important. And behaviors before these individuals and these problems cause damage to the public and or to the image of the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police, page 31. And again, going back to that, let's go back for just a second, please. That issue of identifying, as some people call the bad apples, is extremely important, that those people be removed as quickly as possible, because they do damage the whole image of the police department, and they poison the atmosphere in terms of the relationship between the community and the police. We can move on to number 4. This, hold on a second, please. Examine how the Peduto administration and the Pittsburgh City Council can more strongly and definitively advocate for and negotiate for changes to the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police contract or state and local law to allow for the removal of officers who have demonstrated patterns of misconduct, particularly with regard to the improper use of force. This is a big deal. I'm sure that David Harris, who led that committee, that whole issue of use of force and abuse of force, I should say, remains a big problem in the heart of Pittsburghers and certainly our young people who were leading the protests for many months. This improper use of force remains one of the most important issues affecting community police relations. That just never goes away. And we know it's a problem, but we're asking that you as City Council assist the mayor in making this a reality and not just a conversation. We can move to number 5. Move immediately to amend sections 5.11, 5.112, which will effectively raise the standards addressing the use of force above the Pennsylvania constitutional minimum. This would parallel a use of force passed in California in 2019, page 36. Number 6, exploring ways to immediately expand training of Pittsburgh Bureau of Police officers to fully utilize distance, cover, and time to decrease the necessity of the use of force, page 36. Number 7, making a public commitment now that the use of tear gas, rubber bullets, flashbang devices, pepper spray, beanbag rounds, and other less lethal weapons typically used by the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police for crowd control must be significantly curtailed and used only is the term, in life-threatening situations. I think that will go a long way to having our citizens feel a little more comfortable when they're protesting. That cannot be minimized. Number 8, agree to immediately end kettling or other tactics designed to contain or trap protesters, which surrounds protesters in confined spaces they cannot leave and therefore cannot obey orders to disperse. That's a very frustrating technique, and it's extremely upsetting and confrontational. Page 39. Number 9, a clear and immediate commitment to not wait months, but to identify as quickly as possible an independent organization not affiliated with law enforcement in Western Pennsylvania to generate various recommendations identified in the task force report, and to agree that the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police will revise its policies and procedures to reflect the findings of the independent investigation, page 38 and 39. And again, a clear and immediate commitment to not wait months. That's what upsets people. In addition to the above, I personally advocated that the Peduto administration and the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police review the tragedy involving the death of Walter Wallace Jr. in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, at the hands of police on October 26, 2020, in order to use it as a teachable moment so that such a needless death does not occur in the city of Pittsburgh. I think the death of a man suffering from mental illness whose family had called for an ambulance should not end in death. It is imperative that officers are properly trained. This training thing is again, as former Councilwoman Valerie McDonald Roberts stated, that they're properly trained for such situations and are properly equipped so as to be able to use less lethal options. All such available options must be provided. I'm asking the City Council of Pittsburgh to support the request of the Black Political Empowerment Project with regard to this matter. In addition, I request that the City Council of Pittsburgh move quickly to adopt all of the above recommendations and to legislate as many of the suggested task force changes as possible. Now, the reason why legislation is important, that's because I'm not done. Please move it back, please. Hold. Thank you. The importance of legislation, which you all realize, is it's in law. It's in a legislative format. So it doesn't matter who the mayor is, who the police chief is, who the safety director is. When you legislate, that is what the city of Pittsburgh is committed to do. So that's why we're asking, personally, as chair of BPEP, the Black Political Empowerment Project, as a member of the now defunct task force, but I'm asking that you legislate as much of this as possible. Such action, I think, will help calm the many genuine concerns of our young people and of African Americans, Latinos, and others with regard to policing in Pittsburgh. These suggestions that I highlighted are not in any way meant to minimize the many other important recommendations in the task force report, which also need to be implemented, but to merely prioritize certain recommendations, which might have more of a possibility of demonstrating Pittsburgh's commitment to important police reform. Obviously, I thank the City Council for your commitment to review these recommendations, consider the role you could play in implementation. And I put that in italics just to entertain Quentin Bullock, our chair. I happen to use italics. But it's interesting that in Dave Harris's comments, that's the word he used was implementation, implementation, implementation. So that italics is particularly important, I think. The citizens of Pittsburgh, particularly our young people, await your leadership. Former councilwoman and co-chair of this task force mentioned recruitment. And I do want to just mention that on pages 22 to 26 in the report, we have quite a bit of detail on training, education, and hiring. Just a couple things I'd like to highlight. Police interventions must be implemented with strong policies and training in place rooted in the understanding of procedural justice. That's page 22. On page 23, reform hiring practices to ensure that law enforcement better reflects our Pittsburgh community in terms of culture, race, gender, and includes an extensive psychological assessment aimed at weeding out persons with aggressive personalities. Let's be honest, some people should not wear blue. They should not. These practices should include the examination of the second qualifiers, including the reading test, physical fitness test, polygraph examination, and research to discern the reasons for the gap between white, black candidates in terms of candidates of color. The hiring practices should include conducting a full background check into the applicant's former police job history, disciplinary action, complaints, and reasons for separations. These records being maintained for 30 years. Another key piece on page, that was on 23, 24. There must be extraordinary innovative efforts to significantly increase the percentage of Blacks and women on the police force, such as devising a strong marketing campaign supporting participation in the Civilian Police Academy, the Student Police Academy, expanding criminal justice program in Pittsburgh public schools to attract more African-American candidates, to enhance potential for the recruitment of additional African-Americans. All, this is important, all oral panels for the Bureau must include at least one citizen and should contain at least one African-American. I'm actually wondering right now, the oral panel is 3. I'm wondering if it should be expanded maybe to at least 5 so as to include at least 2 African-Americans. That will make a big difference in the perception of justice and how police are hired in Pittsburgh. We're also looking at making sure that the cameras, the body cameras are on during all calls, which could include requiring body cameras to be left on during any action with the public, interaction with the public. And the police officer who does not adhere to this requirement should receive some level of discipline that is severe enough to help ensure compliance. One other item is the goal of all officers is to be in command of as many de-escalation techniques as possible, which will allow them to be well equipped to secure the scene at hand, to calmly communicate with the citizen involved, produce positive outcomes. Also, and I'm done, the policy that requires police body cams and police car videos be activated immediately when interacting with police as a result of any police call or suspected necessary police intervention, as well as enacting policies which mandate that police report other police who violate police policies. That's a big deal right now, as you know, from what happened over the summer. And training should encourage every officer to be community-minded, compassionate, and empathetic. Community engagement can include career fairs and other events or whatever, but that's some of the highlights from the police recruitment that Valerie McDonald-Roberts commented on.
And I don't.
Thank you, Tim. I got to get to council members. So I'm going to pass it off. I know that that letter went to all members from BPEP, and Tim, all members do now have it. So I am going to go to Council Member Wilson for comment. And then I know there are other hands popping up, but council members, we're trying to get to questions from them. So
can I just make a real quick disclaimer just to say I fully respect Tim Stevens has been doing this work longer than anyone in this city, but many of those recommendations and prioritizations he recommended were not task force prioritization. So I just want to make sure it's clear that that letter is from Tim, not from the task force.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to mention that letter comes from BPAP, correct? Different.
Councilman O'Connor, I hate to, I don't want to overstep council members, please, out of respect, but Amanda Green Hawkins was the subcommittee chair for a very critical issue, and that is the FOP in terms of accountability and discipline. Amanda, if you are, she has to get off in a few minutes, and I did want her to at least say something before she has to leave. Amanda, are you still there? She said she may have to jump off. Amanda?
She just went off.
I'm not seeing her on the screen. We also are joined by Council President Cale Smith as well. So Councilman Wilson.
All right, thank you, and thanks for hosting this and bringing us together. And I thank the police task force to the community police task force to come before us and speak to us in this way. It's really informative and a way we can engage together. So, my initial take when I hear reform is just, how much reform have we done so far? Not since, let's say May or whenever, there was a lot more attention around this discussion, but even previously. So, for instance, the city has already invested in substations. And I was curious to know how that played a part. If you discussed those substations, I know there's one in my district in Northview Heights, and how that, that is some level of reform that we have done previously. And well, number one, if you agree with that, but then also, how is that? Did you look at that at all? Is something like that effective? Is that a recommendation that you would, say continue with and strengthen?
Councilman Wilson, this is Quentin Bullock. I think one way of looking at it is how can the proposed actions begin to transform the view of the community? Because you can do a lot of positive actions, but in the absence of community buy-in and views, it can sometimes be overlooked. Is that a good strategy for the substations? I'm sure there are many values for the substations, but that sometimes is also seen as policing versus how are we engaging the community in transparency and getting a different view of police as a whole, so that as change is done, they see the value and the impact it's having to make it a more welcoming and supportive toward community policing versus policing.
Okay,
Councilman
thank you.
Wilson, Councilman Wilson, have you, I'm sure this is your district, I think, or is it Councilman Lavelle's? Northview Heights community, that's your prototype of a community substation. And, I would defer to probably members of the Housing Authority to comment on how it's going. I can tell you it's going great as far as a substation, but ditto Dr. Bullock's remarks.
Okay. Well, then I'm going to give other members a chance because I know they have some pretty pinpointing questions probably. One that I wanted to ask was just the process that you all went through. So, for instance, I see, the use of tear gas, rubber bullets, flashbang devices, only to be used during life-threatening situations. How, not that we have to be like every other city, but how do we stack up to other cities and what they've been implementing? In your process, how much did you, look at other departments and, was there a model in another city that seemed like they were doing, they were above and beyond with this type of reform?
Councilman, one of the things that we realized was that there isn't a central repository for information about this particular set of issues. I am actually still looking for it myself and have been in touch with various contacts in law enforcement and the academy over the last week. And that is why we decided to take the tack of looking to a police professional or evaluation organization, such as the International Association of Chiefs of Police, whoever, people with expertise outside who are not located here and related to our own enforcement agencies, who could give us the best practices information that we think we need. What we want is what you want. I detected it in your question. We want to be at the cutting edge. We want to be doing things the right way. And that's why we said we should identify people who have that real expertise, and the city should engage them to study that. Not individual incidents, but how do you do this going forward in the best possible way?
All right. So then my final question is just, how much was the actual like how many interviews did you do with officers or commanders? You know, how much participation did the actual officers play in a part of your recommendations?
A lot, a lot. In fact, I think Bobby can testify to that. Any of the subcommittee chairs can testify. I don't think there was a subcommittee where officers were not involved. And we're not talking about just Chief Schubert or Director Hisrich. We're talking about people that are kind of on the ground, including Commander Chris Ragland. So again, Officer Klein Costa. Did I get the name right? Whatever, but you get the idea. They're all listed, councilmen, in the presenter, so you can see a full list of the specific officers. But there were officers that people talked to on the side for questions. So that is one thing that we emphasized in the very beginning, and Dr. Bullock can also echo my comments. We really started out with police. We started out with setting the stage of what is in other areas, and then we immediately went to Chief Schubert, Director Hisrich, and their top level staff. That was how we kicked it off, to make sure we established a baseline and that we knew where we were at before we proceeded forward. We weren't in a vacuum per se. So I appreciate your question and why it was asked.
And everyone was open and honest in their initial and ongoing dialogue because we launched our in-depth discussions with the Bureau of Police, and they were asked some pretty tough questions and information that they did not have. They were timely in following up, and then many also followed up in the various subcommittees specific to the themes that each subcommittee addressed with the police department.
Okay. And then as much as you could have, because some of these injustices that I may speak of may be held up in like a court case, but let's say something has been resolved. Have you, on the other side of this, have you spoken with, people, individuals that, had an experience with police or communities with police that, they view as there was, some extreme injustice happening? So I guess that would be protesters or, people that are in communities that are tired of seeing police act a certain way. How much did you engage with those communities?
We did interview, excuse me, Beth Pittenger with CPRB. We interviewed with Aaron Bruni of OMI. But as far as the individuals, we were open. I'm sure there were individual, and Tim Stevens, I know for sure, received communications from people that were part of the protest movement. We did make through Dr. Angela Reynolds, who wanted BYE, Black Young and Educated, One Hood. We wanted to speak to directly to our young activists for a session, for one of our meetings, to have an open-ended discussion. Unfortunately, that did not happen. It did not materialize. There was a decline of that invitation. However, we felt their input, councilmen, through many of the task force members who are very connected to what their feelings are, what the sentiments are. As far as people that have been have felt that they have been mistreated, abused, etc., and have filed, a formal complaint. No, we did not talk specifically to individuals like that, but broadly overall, particularly in regard to protests and in general police stops and what have you. Yes, there was dialogue. Again, when we read over the presenters, I can tell you with Dr. Gwen Elliott, and in fact, is Bobby, are you still on the line?
I am. I'm still here.
Can you please, just because your recommendation to talk about the the imbalance in policing with our youth, can you address that to Councilman Wilson to talk about individual instances?
Well, I think this was the point that I was trying to make in my opening remarks, that we did engage with a variety of groups of community members, representative of the LGBTQIA community, disability community, those who worked with youth. So I think that we had a broad perspective of those who have had interactions with the police and not always positive interactions with police. And I think that is reflected in the recommendations.
And also, Bobby, the letter that I read into the record as chair of BPEP reflects, I think, part of the urgency of folks in the street. That's partially how I wrote that. And that's why I'm urging expeditious action where the council and the mayor and the police chief and the safety director can move on things maybe a little faster than they would otherwise. I wrote it from that perspective.
Councilman, if I can just add, I think one of the most enlightening conversations we had was with Ciora Thomas of Sisters PTH. And Ciora talked about some of the injustice and cultural insensitivity that the trans community, specifically trans women of color, face with policing. And so we spoke with Ciora, as well as the Tiffany Simino, who heads up the LGBTQIA+ Advisory Council, which of course soon will become the LGBTQIA+ Commission, who will absolutely be integral in helping to implement some of Ciora's recommendations.
That was one of our more powerful conversations I thought we had.
Really was.
If I could just backtrack about 10 minutes, Councilman, your question about other cities and what's going well, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could look to another city and just take their successes and transplant them into Pittsburgh? But we all know that that's not the case. We're looking for promising practice in other cities to figure out how can that inspire us to build our own promising practice here. It is a slow process of getting there. Obviously, we have to get started with it. But in keeping with a vision of community policing, I'm pretty confident that as we move forward into the next national administration, that the recommendations from the police community policing task force of President Obama are going to be risen up more in the national conversation, and that might also guide us.
I would also like to add, if I may, that I don't remember the gentleman's name who came and presented to the task force, but there was a presentation that used New Orleans as a case study for policing. Does anyone recall that on the task force, if that is helpful?
I think it was Roy Austin,
Right.
wasn't it,
Yeah.
Sharon?
Correct.
Roy Austin.
And I would also point to New Orleans in terms of data analytics and the work that they have done to make data real-time and transparent. We had a presentation from an analytics company who has helped New Orleans do that. And I think that is a best practice that we could immediately look to.
Okay. Well, I thank you. I have no further questions. I really appreciate you engage in that way. And I look forward to work with you in the future if I need to reach out on some further questions. So I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for your chairs and your parking spaces.
Thank you, Councilman. We will now, Council Member Lavelle was trying to stay on, but he couldn't. So I'm going to pass off to Councilwoman Gross and then Councilman Strasburger.
Hi there. Did I unmute myself there? It's good to see everybody today. Thank you also for your work on this. It's incredibly important to have citizens engaged in the process, not just because of your different perspective, but you've provided so much additional resources in research and thought and discussion that really helps jumpstart us and really kind of frogs us ahead in our own process if we were relying on our own staff capacity or trying to do these things internally. So I really appreciate everyone's time and effort. I know that this was a big chunk of your energy and emotional and time commitment. So we really value your time and your energy. I have, in listening to the discussion today, tried to think about the kinds of concepts, I think, that sometimes we talk past each other. And in this kind of now 5 or 6 month conversation, we are hearing from various voices in the public. Notably, I think it's maybe just at the top of the report on page 5 or 6, there's a reference to acknowledging that there have been public calls for defunding the police or abolishing the police, right? And the sentence reads something like, I've got scribbled notes in front of me. The task force considered the spectrum between status quo, which I interpret to mean keeping the same maybe numbers of officers and dollars of budget, versus abolishing and going like zeroing out numbers of officers or going to 0 officers or 0 budget. It doesn't really explain it that way, but that would be the opposite ends of a spectrum of action on reducing the police force in numbers or on reducing the police budget in dollars, right? So I just wanted to ask maybe Task Force Chair McDonald Roberts to expand on that, to elaborate a little bit, because there's some bullet points underneath. And here's why. I'll just pose the question a little more directly. In all of the reforms that are very comprehensive in the report, wouldn't reducing, let's say by 10, 20, 30%, the calls for service for those non-serious calls, or replacing officer response with a different kind of responder, like a social service responder, wouldn't that kind of across the board reduce opportunities for police misconduct or police violence or other kinds of negative interactions by that amount? So I just wanted to give you an opportunity there.
And I'm speaking for the task force as we deliberated on this, particularly as far as, do you need a police officer always to go to homeless populations? Should, there's so many police officers actually should be allocated to what they're best in doing as far as their responsibilities, and social service workers should be deployed in what they do best. And sometimes you need both, Councilwoman. I use an example before, and probably several times, is an incident that happened, I believe it was in Cincinnati, but all I can say, it was in a different city, where a domestic violence call was serviced by a police officer with an accompanying social service worker, an ideal situation. And some people say, well, all they needed a social service worker. No, the police officer had to protect the social service worker from the gentleman, from the male domestic partner, from shooting him and the social worker and his female partner. So it is, when I keep saying great, that's what I'm saying. There's no 2 calls that are the same, but absolutely there can be, when they talk about there's reimagining and reallocation of monies to where they're best served. And in the that's why I'm so pleased between council and the mayor's office for developing more avenues to address the components of our society and our community where it is best served by somebody else. So the answer to your question is absolutely yes, as far as funding. But again, this task force, our mission was not to develop a budget for the police. It's up to the mayor's office and council to devise the budget, like on where things should be. We come up with the recommendations, but as far as the actual dollars, I just know that council has already allocated $250,000 over a number of years for just the type of initiatives that you're talking about, Councilwoman.
Absolutely. That did not come out of police budget, just for
Exactly.
clarity for the record.
If I could
Mr.
just
Harris?
elaborate on that.
I think Mr. Harris had his hand up.
Sorry.
Thank you.
No, that's fine. I would just like to add, I don't think the approach of saying 10 or 20 or 30% will get you what you want, Councilperson Gross. We were, my observation has been over the past 5 months that defunding means a different thing to every person you speak to. And I think we were in agreement on the need to reimagine our policing in terms of what services we believe you need a person with a badge and a gun and handcuffs to deliver, and what services do you need a different professional, and what services do you want the pair of them to go together. That's the key thing. If you figure out, well, your police department uses X percentage of its time to respond to serious crimes, things we would want a police officer to be doing. And the rest of them are things that even the police are not interested. They're not interested in policing homelessness. They're not interested in policing drug addiction. They're not interested in getting cats out of trees or answering burglar alarms that go off for no reason. These things can be moved to other service providers. Some things can be completely automated. Nobody likes those red light cameras, but that's there is an opportunity, as you said, for the minimization of police citizen encounters. And that's, I think, what we're looking to do, because if you simply transfer budget money and say 10% is now going to something else, you haven't actually relieved the police department of the responsibility of responding to those calls.
Well, as you said, as Councilman former Councilwoman said, that is City Council's responsibility. So we do have to, one day, we have to actually make that decision by December 31st. But with all due respect, I understand that the task force job was to think about those officers who are carrying a weapon and what their behavior is. So thank you for that input. Was it Mr. Stevens? Yeah, thank you.
I had a point that's relevant to your question from a different angle. Maybe one of the other members of the task force can remember where it came from. But one of the suggestions we were looking at was, which would lower the number of encounters, Ms. Gross, between citizens and police. And that is police stops with cars. If someone has a light out, okay, and the police officer sees their light is out, instead of pulling the car over and potentially ending up with an interaction that neither side wants, why not take the license and send them a what's the term? A ticket? It's another term for that.
I'm not sure if it's citation. I'm not.
Citation.
Okay.
That would charge them whatever. You have a light out and you need to get that repaired within X number of weeks or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
That eliminates a physical interaction between a citizen and officer. Right. So one of the things we suggested be looked at was something in that direction. Because if you watch television across the nation, quite often, very bad things happen when a police officer stops a citizen. That could be. I'm going to
read some numbers for your benefit that you may have not looked at. Governing Magazine from, I think it was a 2015 issue. And what they did was looked at cities, not regions, not counties, not metropolitan areas, but cities and the size of their police forces per capita. And so there, quite a few hundred cities in the, I think, in the list. So I pulled out those benchmark cities that we usually refer to in Pittsburgh, right? That Pittsburgh Quarterly tracks for us and those kinds that we're familiar with. And there's a huge variation in the number of officers per capita. So again, this is per 10,000 people. So it doesn't matter if it's a huge city or a smaller city, right? So there's cities like Austin, which is much bigger than Pittsburgh. And while their total force is 1,750 officers, they have 18.6 officers for every 10,000 people. Pittsburgh has 28.4 officers per 10,000 people. And let me promise you, we also looked up crime data and there's really no correlation. Okay. And then similarly, I think it's really helpful in this governing magazine, and I'm happy to kind of email out the link. Not all of the employees in the department have to be officers. Pittsburgh has a very, very high rate of officers in its police bureau. So Austin, just to stick with that example, has, I'm squinting because I've got my reader bifocals here on. Employees per 10,000 is 24.4 in Austin per 10,000 people, but only 18.6 officers. Pittsburgh is 30.9 employees per 10,000 and 28.4 officers per 10,000. Okay, so that section of your report about relations with the FOP, again, if we had 10-20% of our bureau employees being not officers, they would also not be members of FOP. It's not the whole problem. I acknowledge that, Mr. Harris. It's not the whole problem. I'm not saying there's no value. I think there's incredible value in the recommendations that I see in this report. But I think we should not discount, and when we're looking at outcomes citywide next year, how many of my constituents, how many of our constituents are going to have these negative incidences? We can bring down that percentage. You're talking about actionable things we can do now. We can actually bring those things down by reducing and finding the kinds of calls for service, I think is the term, when you talk about non-serious requests for whatever. All calls for service are calls for service, but not all calls for service require, the skills that a trained police officer have. Right. And in my conversations with our police leadership, they agree that their time and energy and training is applied in situations where it is not needed. And so that we have added in all of our efforts. I mean, I have been the block watch captain before I was elected as council person who was told to say, look, if you see graffiti, call 911. Hey, if you don't look like the look of that person in your alley, call 911. That's what we all said at our block watch meetings and our public safety meetings for a long time, right? And so now we have now we have to stop and say like, whoa, maybe we went a little too far. Maybe there's another way that we divert those. Maybe it still goes to 911 or the call center, but it has to be diverted to, a different kind of call for service. So I've spent a long time there, but we don't need to feel locked in to the number of officers we have per capita and the number of dollars we're spending per capita. I've also shared out yesterday in the last week that we really don't spend $115 million out of our roughly close to $600 million budget. We're spending more like $178 million on just the Bureau of Police. And I feel like that's too much. And I feel like that's what I'm hearing from a lot of citizens, over 3,000 of which emailed us as city council members and asked for us to consider defunding, or at least reducing or reconsidering the size of that police budget. So I didn't want to leave that go unsaid in the context of this discussion, but I'm going to move on. I really also hear from public and from different advocacy groups and from different voices that there is this notion of are we spending too much on policing? Can we be spending that either on social services or other kinds of investments like housing, like childcare, like food, all of the basic needs that our citizens have and that we are not filling enough. But then there's also, has been a longstanding set of voices calling for violence prevention, and many of the people here on the panel have been in those discussions over the years and put in good work about reducing gang violence, gun violence. But I want to make sure we distinguish that what we heard loudly this year was a reduction in police violence, right? In police violence, whether that was because of George Floyd or Breonna Taylor, or the kind of response to protests that we saw this year. And so my question that really isn't, maybe not a question for you, but I am questioning myself and on council, we just voted for dollars to the Stop the Violence Fund. In fact, we have provisional vote that will have final vote next week on significantly higher than $250,000, millions of dollars to go into that fund. Is that going to be applicable as well to some of the reforms you propose here that are for reducing police violence, and for funding the training and for funding the changes in recruitment? I don't know if you've given that any thought, and I'll just let that be an open question for anyone here.
Okay, yes, as far as the funding, again, we were very pleased to see as a task force. Oh, and before I forget, there's a number of people that had to get off. Co-chair, Dr. Quentin Bullock, he had to tend to another activity within his purview as president of CCAC. Sharon Warner, Sharon's still there, but she's going to have to get off soon. And I think Dr. Bobby Wadgreer, she had to leave. But so just wanted to acknowledge that. As far as the monies, as a task force, we were very pleased to see what council was doing. In fact, I had a conversation with Dr. Bullock. I'm like, it's just like a lot of balls in the air. And he made a very wise comment during our dialogue. He says, we're going to continue doing what we do as a task force. And council, and if the mayor's office wants to do an executive action, and council wants to legislate something, it's all going to work together, period. Whether it's 250 for allocation towards Stop the Violence or whatever. So we were very, very pleased with how we're all moving in the same direction. As far as the individual, and again, I would have to defer back to council and the mayor's office for devising how we do that. But I do want to say one thing, Councilwoman. We did talk about the 911 calls, 311 calls. We believe, and I'm not sure if this is spelled out clearly in the report, but I know that there is inference there. And I will defer to Dr. Harris, who scrutinized through this report. But we want to make sure that when call centers are notified from constituents of a problem, there really does need to be an evaluation and just a review, just to kind of like, sometimes you just got to go back and like, what are we doing? How those calls should be dispensed with, whether it is a police call, whether it's a police call with a social worker, whether it's just a social worker, whether it's somebody that can climb a tree and get a cat out. And I knew, David, you would say something. I was going to say that, but about taking the cat out the tree. So that is something that the city is going to work with the county, because 911 is a city county initiative. So that's for you all. There's a lot of things that the city and the county can also collaborate on, as far as, are we doing this as effectively and as efficiently as possible? And ultimately, the more efficiencies you have, the more dollars are saved or spent better. So that's the only way I can answer.
Thank you. I know it's so, these things, sometimes our pendulums kind of swing back and forth. When I came onto council, we had council members and communities really advocating for an increased number of officers, right? Well, we're up to about 1,000 officers now. And when the data I cited, our total officers were only 872. And our population has gone down and our officers have gone up. So that per capita I cited is actually kind of a low end, right? Because it's data that was published from like 2015.
Councilperson Gross, may I respond to your?
Yes, absolutely, Mr. Harris. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond directly to your question. You're absolutely right that the core issue that got this whole movement across the United States moving was police violence. If you look at the section of the report on use of force, you will find 16 recommendations that are targeted exactly that problem, and none of them require $1. None of them.
Okay, so good. That's actually was my question. So I see that, yes, I saw that section, but this idea of kind of like, sometimes people will say, well, where's the money going to come from? Right.
Yeah,
And so that's an important point to highlight. Thank you.
Yes, I mean, on the back end, once you got your policies changed, you would have to retrain on those policies.
Right.
But to change the policies into a better direction doesn't cost anything.
Thank you. Thank you.
And
That's an
rel-
important point.
And it goes back to the collaboration and external partners, as David has indicated, and all of us task force members have indicated. There are so many people out there. What we discovered through the process, Councilwoman, everybody wants to help, and they're not always giving us an invoice. None of us have an invoice. Okay, we're volunteers. There are many external people out there with expertise, with the second set of eyes, a very unbiased, fresh set of eyes to help with this in terms of, do we have an inordinate amount of police violence? Is it violence? How can we, that it should not be just anecdotal, it should be supported by data. It should be both. And there are a lot of people that will help because of their civic engagement, their civic service, just like we have with the task force. So I think that, as David said, it's not a money thing. It's just a matter of political will to collaborate with people who are a fresh set of eyes for you.
And Councilwoman, I'm sorry, Gross, again, some of the things that I highlighted on page 22 to 27 on the recruitment, training, and education and hiring. Again, much of that has nothing to do with extra expenses. It's how people are trained, how the culture of the Police Bureau of Pittsburgh is formulated and marketed and maintained, or created, I should say, is what's going to help avoid some of these negative interactions between the police and the community.
Thank you.
And if I can,
Go ahead.
I didn't mean to cut you off, sorry. If I could just add the recent announcement about the Office of Community Health and Safety shifting some of the responsibility for responding to incidents involving, individuals experiencing homelessness, individuals experiencing mental health crises, and addiction issues, shifting those away from police and into mental health professionals and people embedded in the communities will also reduce interactions with police, which could lead to violence, and will also work hand in hand with the Stop the Violence investment that council initiated along with the mayor.
Glad to hear it. Thank you. I want to put a plug in for the emphasis on disaggregating data and the reporting. We've been bringing that up with the Gender Equity Commission as well across city departments. So why not start here, since we've got a call to action. And just to sometimes to clarify what that means, right, is to be able to see when incidents or even calls for service can be identified by the data on gender, race, even neighborhood, those kinds of things broken down, not in a way that identifies individuals publicly, so we kind of balance that impact, but that so we can acknowledge any problems, right? If we combine data up to a level that you can't see which kinds of people are being impacted negatively, then you can't identify the problem and you can't start to fix the problem. So sometimes when we talk about that, it's really important for the public, I think, to understand what we're talking about. If you don't ask whether, for example, I'm just going to make up a stupid example, maybe all traffic stops that end in an arrest, for traffic lights are only women. Well, you wouldn't know that if you don't break it down by gender. That's probably not true, right? But just to put out a hypothetical, you have to actually ask the question first, or before you can identify and see a pattern and find a solution for fixing the problem. So thank you for identifying that.
One of the
Can I
things,
just
Councilman Gross.
wait, sorry, can I just step in real quick?
Sure.
Councilwoman
Councilman
Strasburger
has been waiting.
She,
I have to
she
go.
just
I'm
ha-
sorry.
No. She just has to make a statement, and then I'm going to go back to Tim and Councilwoman Gross. We have plenty of time. I just want Councilwoman Strasburger to
I'm
make
going
her
to wrap up
statement.
because Tim, so sorry, Tim, but I also wanted to tee up Councilwoman Strasburger for her excellent, helpful memo that she sent out that I actually, where she analyzed some of the 911 call responses. And I was kind of bringing that up, but I don't know if you want to mention that, Councilwoman Strasburger.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Yeah, I apologize. I joined late and I have to be somewhere at 11:30. So I just wanted to say a few things. I don't actually have any questions. I just wanted to respond to something some things that I've heard. First of all, thank you, Councilman O'Connor, for chairing this post agenda. Thank you all. I just want to echo what everyone's already said. Thank you all for your time and energy. I ran into Tim Stevens earlier this summer who said, I have binders full of binders on every subcommittee on this report, working towards this report. So it's been very helpful so far. And I just want to acknowledge that at the beginning of this summer, we as council members, I think the public often thinks that we are experts on every possible issue that every council member is going to have to encounter, and we're not. We oftentimes have to learn as we do and build the plane as we fly it. And for me, on this particular issue, that was the case this summer. As I was getting 3,000, 5,000 emails over the course of 5 days from a very angry and concerned public on police violence, I was also then digging in, as you all were, to try to learn more about this issue, to learn more about policing, public safety more generally, reading everything I could get my hands on. My staff and I were all learning together, interviewing people, experts in the field all over the country, including some of you on this task force. And the way that I learn is I put together my own sort of memo, I guess, on what the city could do, what the county could do, and what school board could do, on actions that the state and federal government could take as well. And anyone who doesn't have that, I'd be happy to send over. It's also on my District 8 website. And what was helpful was to create that and then to see your task force report and to compare and contrast. And mine is intentionally a draft so that it can be iterated over a period of time, so that the second version will be coming out soon after more that I've learned, and then a third version, and so on until we have something. I guess a couple points I wanted to make were, one, the calls from the beginning were our police budget is too bloated, we have too many police officers. And what I've kind of realized over the course of the summer and the fall has been, if we do nothing but cut budgets and cut numbers of police and don't have something to replace it with, that's not helpful. That's not helpful to anyone. I don't think anyone agrees that that's going to improve our public safety. It's what many people are asking for, but as we've seen in other cities, it's just not necessarily going to be the thing that helps improve public safety overall. Second, whether we're talking about minimizing interactions with police when it comes to traffic violations or parking violations, which, as we know from the 911 data the last 2 years, those are two of the biggest responses that we see for 911 responses in terms of time and numbers. It's not going to happen overnight. or whether we're talking about that, or whether we're talking about a co-response model, which I know that the mayor's office and his initiatives are working to implement. Neither of those is going to happen overnight or even in year one. I mean, when we look at the co-response model to sort of a solo social worker response model in, say, Denver, that took 3 years to get off the ground. So this expectation that it's going to happen in year one. Now, we certainly can make strides in year one, and we certainly can plan for what a budget could look like 5 years from now. And I think we should. I guess the second point is, what I see is that there are so many issues to tackle when it comes to implementation, as Councilman Krause said, as Tim made the point about, that David made the point about, many others, that I think we really need to work together. We need to all figure out what issue we each want to tackle. I too am interested in this sort of what we can do to minimize traffic interactions with police and parking interactions. I'm interested in the disaggregated data reporting, as Councilwoman Gross is. I think others are interested in other issues. Let's come together. Let's figure out what council member is working on which, divvy up the work, just like this task force divvied up the work, and work with the mayor's office to figure out what the mayor can do and what council can do, and then just come up with a plan and a blueprint and get it done. So that would be my suggestion.
All right, thank you, Councilwoman. Thanks for hanging in there. I'm going to pass it back
Thanks so
to
much.
Councilman Gross for more comment and questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Corey. That's all I really had. I had been wrapping up my comments to say that I was happy to see about the segregated data. Certainly there's lots to work with here. So good work, everyone. I appreciate it.
Councilman
thank you.
Gross.
Oh, sorry.
Councilman Corey O'Connor. Earlier on, one of the members mentioned, I forgot who it was. I don't know if it was David or somebody else. A comment, maybe it was Valerie, a comment made when the chief spoke to us several weeks ago. He, and correct me, members who are left, if I'm incorrect. He basically admitted, and our report reflects that there are a lot of incidents where race appears to be a factor, if not a major one, in terms of traffic stops and other data, that Black people are several times more likely to be arrested or stopped, or whatever. One of those statistics, I believe, was 10 times as much, David. Am I correct? And one of those statistics from professor from Pitt, from school of social work, gave a very detailed report, very troubling. And the chief basically admitted he could not defend or explain maybe why those statistics are that way. And the public in general is basically going to assume that race is in fact the defining factor. So I think from a community perspective, I would hope council and the mayor and the chief and the safety director would take, as a priority to look at that piece. I know we're talking about having an independent entity come in and all that, but maybe there just needs to be an honest conversation between the police leadership and administration and looking at itself as to why are these statistics actually moving in a negative direction. Am I right, David? In some cases. Why are these statistics going in a wrong direction in Pittsburgh?
I think you are right, Tim. Yes, what we saw was that over time, even as the police department has ramped down certain categories of enforcement, which is a positive thing, the disparities in some of those categories have gone up, not gone down, not stayed the same, but gone up. And this is looking at the police department's own data. And when the chief was asked about that, he said, I see it, but honestly, I don't have an explanation. I don't know what to do about it. And that, I think, is part of what's uniquely troubling to people about this. And I want to make clear, we are not just talking about the statistics, which were troubling themselves, which are not deep enough and are not disaggregated enough. We are talking about people's lived experience. We are talking about what happens to them, and that cannot be discounted.
Thank you. I think Valerie, you want to make one more statement, then I'll wrap it up. Thank you.
Yes. In addition, I forgot to mention Amanda Green Hawkins had to get off earlier, and I said, "Oh, I'll cover for you." She says, "This is, when you come down to FOP contractual nuances, the law." She says, "I'd rather do that." She did offer to council members to have a very thorough and candid dialogue with any of you all regarding her subcommittee on the FOP interaction with the community and Act 9, Act 111, et cetera, et cetera. She is labor counsel for USW, so she would know. And she does have a very novel idea that would rest within city council in terms of developing public policy, a public policy per se. So with that, I'm trying to think. The one thing that I would say to you all, since we have a captive audience of council members. I believe that when you talk about the disparities that you see, and to be able to say, the chief saying, I really don't know why that is a disparity. And Dr. Harris, David had put it very nicely, is that you can't call it racism or discrimination unless you determine that it is racially based. It needs to be reviewed. I would ask for city council to really have a thorough review of that data so that we do have explanations and to determine, do we really have a problem? Yes or no? Right now on the surface, it looks like we do. There's implicit bias, there's racial bias. Welcome to the human race. Everybody has it. You all know that. But so it's going to be in the police department. It's a matter of what does the data say and what policies need to be developed to address it, depending upon how it fans out as far as, is it really, we have a real race problem or whatever. It needs to be ascertained. This report doesn't say that per se. It says there are data that can substantiate that, but we don't know. So I would say to city council, because we have a citizens academy, to Councilman O'Connor, who's leading this, and to President Teresa Cale Smith, the police academy is still a thing, and people learn about police operations and the processes. What may be considered violence may be an IMPOETC approved procedure for how to contain a person. We don't know. There needs to be a dialogue in education. I would recommend to city council within your purview, maybe develop, instead of the Citizens Police Academy being just a group of people that meet somewhere, have it posted, have it online, have it so that everybody can participate, so that people can ask questions about police procedures. Like we had to eliminate chokeholds. What other police procedures are there that may be misconstrued? Why do they stop? What makes them stop a car? And again, I think there needs to be education, dialogue, and I think that this is a great opportunity for a city council to be able to use your venues of post agendas and what have you to educate the public, and let's have that dialogue.
Yeah.
It's just my personal opinion.
I totally agree. I'll Rabbi has a statement, and then I'll wrap everything up. Rabbi, thank you.
So just on that note, concurrent with serving on the task force, I registered for the Citizens Police Academy, and I'm still in it. It's online, right? It has been an education for me to understand how the police understand what are the tools that they need in order to do their job well, what the humanity is behind the work that they do, and what are the challenges behind it. So I fully concur, Valerie. I believe that it should be more widespread. There are about 30 of us or so, but I also think that it needs to be more intentional in what's presented. It is at the discretion now, from what I can tell, of the lead officer, right, in doing that. It's a very good course. I'm learning a great deal, but I think that there's a larger group that could be helping to frame that so that it gets us to the goal of transforming the perception of the police from warriors to guardians, which we all agree is what we need.
Councilman, if I could just add to that very briefly, and I do promise, I want to make certain that we do recognize the members of the police force that are partners with us in this, and they are the large, vast majority. And I don't want to lose sight that they are truly an important component to the recommendations and to the implementation of them. Thank you very much for doing this, Councilman.
Thank you, and thank you to everybody for following. We actually have to get off. There is, we're scheduled at 11:30. There's the Cablecast team has something scheduled at 11:30, so we just made it. But I want to thank everybody, thank the committee, thank my fellow council members. We do have budget coming up next week, and I'm hosting the Public Safety Department on Thursday morning, I believe. So there are a lot of larger conversations that are happening. I mean, just from, and I'll be brief with my comments, you know, when it comes to implementation, I think that was big. Everybody had said that, everybody mentioned that. I think it's on us to make sure that that happens, and the administration. That's what we're in charge of doing. I also think, you know, training and education is very helpful. Even when we come to the budget, you know, letting people know that certain things are already paid for and we have no control over it, based on state acts and agreements and pensions and things like that. I did hear something, I know Councilwoman Gross loves her data, but data was mentioned multiple times today. And I think that's such a great follow-up. And I know the Councilwoman stresses that for all of us, which I think is great that we heard it from the task force and everybody as well. So I just want to thank everybody for being here. Thank you for your time and your dedication to the city that we all love and support. And I also want to thank our sign language interpreters. They do a really good job, and I really want to thank them very much for their hard work today, as well as the clerk's office and and David and his team as well. So again, thank you, everybody. I'm sure we'll have follow-up conversations about post agendas and other meetings in the future. And again, I would encourage everybody to watch for next week's budget hearings and conversations that happen in the next few weeks.
Thanks for having us, Corey. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care.